Hey guys, Ian here with Amplified Fitness. Just a little bit about me since this is the first video you guys will be seeing from me. I am a NASM certified personal trainer. I have a master's degree in math, bachelor's in math, and a bachelor's in math education. So, education itself, math, looking at studies, reading studies, statistical application, things like that are all just directly up my alley. It's things I've been doing since I was 18 and I'm now 28, so 10 years of my life devoted to this and spent doing this. This is what I love to do. So this video and the videos that are going to come after this, all the videos on here, are purely educational. It's all about helping to understand what's going on, the things that I research. Once I start getting into something, I research it in depth. Everything I do is research based. And so we'll be starting getting into that. Today, our video is all about the science-based lifting community. We've all seen the TikToks, we've all seen the YouTube shorts, we've all seen all of our favorite creators start swinging in one direction or the other in this science-based lifting community. We have low volume, we have, 6 reps max. Anything above that is cardio and it's labeled as fatigue, full body every other day, upper, lower. All of these low volume, high intensity things. And on the other side, we have these high volume, low intensity, 40, 50 plus sets per muscle group per week. And it seems like we're just in this pendulum of, well, the research says this, discrediting some authors because we don't agree with what they've said, even though their research led them to that. So understanding the research itself is really the key thing to this today, and how to read a paper, how to understand what it's saying, statistically what it's saying, whether it's statistically significant or not. What does statistically significant mean? And just talking about the science-based lifting community in general. As you guys can see from the title, this is about maximization or reductionism. The current science-based lifting community, from what I've seen of the current science-based lifting community, it's all about, well, we're trying to maximize our gains. We're trying to be the most optimal. We need to get rid of this exercise because this other one is 1% more optimal or targets the muscle 1%, 2%, 10% better. Just because it seems more optimal doesn't necessarily mean that we need to completely vault or get rid of these other exercises. They still have their place and they still have their time. It's just like any other thing. I'm not going to completely get rid of some branch of math because, well, this other path is a little bit more optimal. It's a little bit better. Whereas the other path still has its place. It still has its merits. It still has people who devote their entire careers as mathematicians to it. Just because it is a little more optimal doesn't mean that it is necessarily going to be the best thing, and we need to ignore and completely get rid of that other option. So, starting this off is kind of talking about what's considered to be nuance in literature and science when we're reading through a scientific study. So what's happening right now is we've gotten rid of the bro science of, well, I'm going to do a chest day, I'm going to do a back day, I'm going to do an arms day, I'm going to do a shoulders day, I'm going to do a legs day, and just repeating that over and over and over again. And now it's more of the same level of idea and the same level of ideology into what is considered science-based and what is considered to be the more optimal thing to do. Now, science isn't just a list of things that we need to do in this order, this list of steps that are infallible and without question. The entire science-based process is, we have a question. We have something we want to know. We test that. We run through a series of tests. That's what a research study is. We run through the series of tests to come to a result. We take that result and we contextualize it. We look at, okay, there were this many people. We tested with these methods. We got these results. What does it mean for the general population? What can we take from this? And we repeat that process over and over and over again until we come to an understanding. Now, with the science-based community, we seem to forget the contextualization part, the nuance to it. If we take a study on untrained lifters and we try and give that to these elite, just genetic freaks, well, our results are going to be different. If we take untrained lifters and we give it to an advanced lifter who maybe doesn't have the best genetics, maybe doesn't have, their recovery on lock, who doesn't have their nutrition locked in, key variables that we weren't going to account for, well, the results aren't the same. So just because one study had this, we need to understand the context. We need to understand what's going on behind the scenes. What else do we need to account for in that? And so once we strip that method down to rules, all right, a certain number of sets, a certain number of reps, a certain number of RIR, just completely without context, and take that as law, well, we're not scientists anymore. Now we're taking that and we're essentially actors. We're performers. We're taking what someone else does and just using it without any kind of knowledge behind, well, why did they do that? What actually happened? What's the reasoning behind it? Was there any limit to the study? That is the death of nuance. And it's everywhere. All right, I've seen it in all of my TikToks that I go through on the science-based living community. I've seen it in my reels. I've seen it on Facebook. I've seen it everywhere. The comments. Oh, going through and you're scrolling through and you're seeing someone's post about their program, and you see all of these holy fatigue, things like that. And it's wild to me that we're taking nuance out of everything here. We're taking the context out of everything. And there are even programs that follow rigid formulas like that. Now, when you're working with someone who is brand new, yes, you need to have a set number of factors. But at the same time, that's an untrained person. They're going to respond differently than a trained person. Now, this video is going to talk all about that. And we'll look at the pendulum swings. We're going to look at why this is often misleading and how to actually integrate evidence with experience, how to bring that human factor back in, and what truly becomes maximization, not being minimalistic, not reducing things to their logical extreme, or even becoming sort of, as you could kind of say, science-based lifting communities become more of a kind of a cult. There's a ritual to their lifting. So we're going to dive into that in this video. Now, in plain terms, here's the problem with how we're treating the science-based community. It's become almost a personality trait. It's not a process. It's not a method. It's not a experiment and repeat with a hypothesis. It's a trait. It's a label people slap on themselves, and they act like we've just completely solved every problem with our training. Now, I've watched smart lifters stop and think. I've watched people go through, and I've run experiments. I know, smart lifters will go through and run an experiment on themselves to truly become evidence-based, because they know that just because one study or handful of studies said something doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be true for the entire population. There are differences in people. Now, they may not be as big as we would like to think, but to truly be evidence-based, you have to run the experiment for an extended period of time. I use research, all right? People dig into the research papers that they do, and they look at, okay, what are the limitations here? What were their methods? How did they actually go about doing this? How long was it run? How many people were in it? What was the population of people that were used? But a lot of the science-based lifting community takes what one influencer says or what one person says that they follow wholeheartedly without question and take it as truth, infallible. Now, just because we can respect what some people are saying, or we respect that, these people are saying science, they're actually going and looking through the research, or they're at least reading the abstracts, great. But that doesn't mean that we have to just roll over and listen to every single thing that these people are spewing from their mouths. We lean on the studies. We don't rely on them completely, wholeheartedly, infallibly. we lean on them, we look at them, we run an experiment ourselves, we look at their methods, and we take that into our own training and run an experiment ourselves following the same methods. All right. Now, these are all tools to help us. It doesn't mean that they're going to always be the truth for each and every individual. And the problem with the community is that there's no interpretation of that evidence. They're taking it just as baseline truth. There is nuance. There are things that are going to change based on the context, like we just talked about. But we have these two extremes that both miss the point. On one side, we have people who follow Dr. Mike, or I guess at this point, Mr. Mike, and they're doing ultra high volume, 40 plus sets per muscle group per week, saying that it's maximally adaptive, saying that they're, where they're aiming for that maximal recoverable volume. Now, that's going to be different for each person depending on your body, your joints, your ligaments, your muscles, how long you've been training, whether you're natural or unnatural. All of these things are going to determine your maximal effective volume. And taking what one person is saying, or a couple people are saying just because they're doctors, and applying it to themselves as if they're that person, well, they're missing the point. That person has found their maximal recoverable volume, or at least they say their maximal recoverable volume. That's not going to be the same number for every single person. And on the other side, we have these science-based lifters, SBL, who do 6 sets per muscle group per week, and they're running 3-day a week full body every other day, or they're running a 4-day upper lower, and they're treating it as if it's this new just truth, as if it's infallible. I'm going to keep saying that word a lot because it's what I've seen. They seem to claim that there is nothing to speak against it, but they're not truly being scientific in their methods. They're being performers. They're looking at it and forgetting the context, forgetting the nuance that lives there. They're forgetting that there is a human side to this. And both will look at a similar study or even the same study and get something completely different from it because they're reading into it. And they both think that their version of the same data set is the truth. And what gets lost is this middle ground, the reason behind the numbers. Volume works when recovery matches the output. All right, when we're able to recover from what we're putting into it, then we're going to have a better effect on the muscle gains. Low volume minimalism works when effort and proximity to failure are very, very high, meaning you're failing at every set. You are putting in just the max 100% effort every single set. But you have to be careful with that because you need to be able to recover. We just look at, the comment sections. It says stimulus to fatigue ratio. We're looking at junk volume. We're looking at holy fatigue. Now, they are meaningful concepts. They are things that we do need to be careful of and watch out for. But when it's just an absolute, when it's something that we say on anything that is over 6 sets per week or anything that is not a full body every other day split, it loses all meaning. There is no point to saying that stuff if we don't understand the context behind what is going on. Now, a study might show that higher volumes tend to give us a little bit more hypertrophy. There was the Schoenfeld study that showed there was a dose response to higher volume. Working up to, I think it was somewhere in the 10 to 20 plus sets per week. But saying tend to is not the same as will. There is a key difference in the wording there. Tend to is meaning that with the people they used, with the population they used, under the methods that they were using, you could see that happen. It's not necessarily that it's going to, but that it could. Now, when we're looking at minimalism or reductionism, as we could say, it might work for some people, but that doesn't mean you can generalize it to every advanced lifter looking to get the most out of their sessions, looking to get the most out of the work that they put in. Real training, when you're really pushing yourself and you're maximizing and everything is locked in, that's where science is informing your choices. Okay? It's not that you're only doing what's exactly laid out in these methods because you're part of that population, but is that you're listening to your body telling you, hey, we have this fatigue accumulated. Hey, we are running a little low on energy today. Hey, we need to lock in on that recovery. Our sleep hasn't been that great. Or you're listening to your logbook of your workouts and you're seeing that, well, okay, I'm hitting kind of a plateau here. I can't progressively overload anymore. Something's going on. Or you're at home and you notice that your sleep is getting disrupted. You don't feel as recovered in the morning. You don't feel as recovered or ready to go for that next session. Well, then we need to take a look at ourselves and understand that maybe we are taking the science to an extreme that it wasn't meant for. Now, this isn't anti-data. It's not pretending to be evidence-based. Evidence is not a replacement for intuition. The studies don't know your body. The studies don't know your central nervous system. The studies don't know your specific maximum recoverable volume. It doesn't know your food intake. It doesn't know your recovery habits. You do. You need to take the studies and take the science and apply it to yourself in a way that makes sense, as if you're experimenting on yourself. Now, all these do is they give us a point of reference, just a way to say, okay, I should be aiming for this, or I should be seeing this if I apply it to myself. And that is really the key to what we need to be doing here with Nuance. And you just need to trust that your results will always show against somebody who just argues citations online and never pushes close enough to their true maximum potential online. These people in the comments section saying holy fatigue, saying risk to reward ratio, saying things like, what else did I say? Junk volume. When you listen to your body because you know your body better and you're using that science as a reference point rather than just the truth that you live by, your results will show that and their results will show that. So moving forward, I might talk about a couple more studies, some really credible people who actually know what they're talking about, have been saying the same thing for years and years now. This is just more of a framework, though, right? Talking about how to what you should do to interpret, apply, observe, adjust. All right, it's the real meaning behind evidence-based. When it comes to studies and it comes to understanding the science, everybody just wants to hear a number because numbers feel safe. We know that if somebody says 2 sets to failure, that if I go to 3 or 4, what happens then? Or if I only do 1 set to failure, what happens then? What happens if I do a drop set? We're making these complex systems look extremely simple by just including numbers, and simplicity is a way to control how we're feeling about things. It makes us feel better. But control through data really only works if the data represents the reality that you're trying to control. And in lifting, that's almost never the case. There are a lot of contexts and variables and just pieces of the puzzle that we cannot account for. So giving a hard and fast number, single number, not a range, but just a single number, often works against us. And it's just a way to make ourselves feel better. Most studies, and I'm just saying this because a lot of people don't like hearing it, don't want to hear it, but it's true. I've seen a lot of studies. I've seen people manipulate studies in statistics classes. You are taught and you learn how easy it is to manipulate a statistic, how easy it is to manipulate the data that you're seeing in front of you into a way that benefits what you want to talk about. And what it comes down to is that most studies in the field of exercise science are built for statistical clarity in and of itself, just having the statistic ready to go. Not that there is going to become a practical transfer for the entire population, but a general portion of the population. The average test subject isn't you. It's not, right? If you're an untrained lifter, then maybe you fit a lot of those. If you're an advanced lifter, you might fit in with some of those people who got to partake in the study, but on average, in general, you are not the average subject. Your gym is not the average test environment. Those are highly, highly designed to try and limit the variables possible. Your life is not a test subject field case. There are variables, tests, limits that make you different than the average test subject. All right, researchers are isolating the variables that they can. They're making each test standardized using the same equipment, using the same food, using the same whatever they have to get this statistical clarity when all things are kept the same or as close to the same as possible. Now, it's not to say that that's bad science. It's just narrow. It narrows the scope to a point of not entirely being truthful or not entirely encapsulating the audience that's going to read it or the audience that's going to try and interpret it. And when people take those and they apply them just universally to themselves, to others, they're forgetting that an average describes an entire population, not individual people. If you look at a bell curve, all right, that is the most general average that we can talk about. We can talk about the mean, we can talk about the median, we can talk about the mode, we can talk about all those averages. But that describes an entire population. There are people on the very far end who are in the top 1%, top 2%, whatever it is. So many standard deviations away from that mean, away from that average. There are people who are the exact average. But it's not going to be each individual person, and more often than not, it's not you. So when you hear something like 6 sets per week, 40 sets per week to maximize growth, or there was that study that everyone keeps quoting about muscle protein synthesis peaking at 40 grams of protein. Those are for population trends, right? It is not a hard and fast rule for everybody, but there is a trend, or there is something that tends to happen in a population. It's not that it's a ceiling. It's not that it's the maximum, right? That 40 grams of protein was disproven. If you go and read somebody like Lyle McDonald and his protein book, he will recommend much more than 40 grams. He will say that you can eat 80, 90, 100 grams of protein in a meal, and it'll just take time to digest. Now, the main thing to talk about here is that there are limits to measurements. There are blind spots in measurements. We can use all the fancy equipment that we want to. Force plates, EMGs, ultrasounds, DEXA scans, anything like that. But they all have their limitations to the particular study that they're going to. We can talk about the thickness of a muscle, we can talk about the torque that you're producing, but what we can't easily look at or we can't see very well is the intent behind what you were doing, the fatigue, the internal drive, the mechanical tension being produced. We can't measure those things with physical instruments, but they definitely lead to different results and different conclusions. So we end up chasing things that are measurable, but we forget what's meaningful. And it happens in nutrition all the time. All right, we have that myth of protein absorption, and it really only exists because people were thinking that digestion is a linear, short term thing. It's not. The body doesn't have a timer that stops digesting after a certain amount of grams or a certain amount of time, or, the anabolic window. That's not how the body works. It's a very complex system that we're still trying to understand, that adapts and redistributes the nutrients over time. Now, we can look at things like there's a study done on casein, which is a slower protein that can sustain amino acid elevation for hours and hours. And in that same study, they looked at whey protein, showing that it spikes faster and declines sooner. Okay, that doesn't prove a black and white absorption limit. That shows that there are variables that we need to take into effect, that we need to take into context. There's nuance to understand there. We need to read between those lines. The issue isn't the data itself. It's I'm just going to be blunt here, it's the weaponization of the data to sound intelligent. I was scrolling through TikTok the other day, and there was a kid on there, maybe 10, 11, who was quoting an abstract or, providing a specific quote from a research study, trying to argue his point over somebody who has experience and I'm sure has done a lot of experiments on themselves and listens to, new research as it comes out and looks for the context. But this kid was just spouting the study almost word for word back at this person as an argument. Now, we'll quote all these things and turn into a rule, but rules, when they're built on an average or they're built on a trend or they're built on something like that, fail at the extremes. Once we're more than 2 standard deviations away from the mean, the results crumble. And we've taken all of this to an extreme. We've swung from pro science to high volume to low volume. And that's where we're living right now, is in these 2 extreme camps, where the research even on hypertrophy and muscle building and what number of sets is ideal for hypertrophy. Well, we have studies that are looking at 4 sets per week, 10 sets per week, 50 sets per week. But what about that middle ground? The middle ground is where most of us are sitting, where a lot of us who understand the science and understand that there's context to and understand the methods and the limitations are trying to live. And this understanding that there's nuance, understanding that there's limitations, understanding that we need to, in order to be evidence-based, truly look at recreating the study in our own lives with our experiences, with our fatigue, with our bodies. That is someone who's actually using the science, not someone hiding behind it, trying to sound smart and weaponizing it. Now, if you scroll through any of the science-based lifting feeds, if you scroll through TikTok, Reddit, whatever it is, you'll see what looks like precision, what looks like science everywhere. They're always spouting these percents. We have a bunch of numbers. We have confidence intervals, even graphs. We have acronyms. They're throwing p-values everywhere. But quoting data and quoting a study isn't the same as understanding it. Understanding it takes time. It takes looking through and reading through and sifting through, understanding each part, understanding the methods, understanding the limitations, and truly digging into what is being said. People will cite sample sizes under 20. People will talk about statistical significance. Uh, People will, look at all of these things that sound and, reasonably are scientific, but they don't ask the question of what can I meaningfully take from this? Uh, if we look at some of the people who have really dug into research and done this their entire lives and have been top of their fields in this, they talk about significance and statistical significance, telling you that there is something there, but it doesn't tell you what matters, what's meaningful about this, what can I take from it. It takes time to do that. It takes understanding to do that. It takes reading through and rereading and pulling from other sources as well to put together a full puzzle piece, to put together a full picture of what's happening. Taking a single study or taking two studies that back each other and saying, well, this is my full picture, that's like looking at 2 pixels of a picture and knowing what it is. I'm sorry, but we are not that guy who knows GeoGuessr. We're just an average person. We're regular people trying to understand and trying to do the best that we can. So what we're doing, and I guess to wrap this section up, what a lot of influencers have done is they've taken the complexity of digging through and understanding and sifting through and given it in its most simplistic form as a set of rules that their audiences take at face value for an appeal to authority and spout that same thing verbatim time after time after time. This is what's really turning science-based lifting into what it's become, which is essentially almost a meme. We're pretending to be precise. We're pretending to be scientific in this I'm trying to be an intellectual person kind of way. When really all we're doing is taking things and reducing them to a logical extreme and disguising it as rationality. That brings me to the next point here. If our measurement is limited and interpretations can be twisted, how do we move forward? How can we continue our progress? How can we continue to make innovations without completely throwing science out? It's not that we're rejecting science. We would never reject science. Science gives us our base. We have to reintegrate it. We have to bring the human element back. We have to talk about being people and opening up that way. So how do we move forward from here? If the measurement alone doesn't capture everything we're looking for, if that measurement alone is like using a macro lens to try and take a landscape panoramic picture, and our interpretations keep leading down the road to these extremes and ideologies, then the only way forward is to reintegrate our humanity, the human part. It's not that we're rejecting science. We're not blindly trusting the science. We're not giving it an infallible status here. What's happening is we're putting the humanity back into the training itself, because in the end, that's what matters. We are just people trying to maximize our growth. We are people trying to become our best versions of who we can be, and even better than that. We're trying to reach the max state of humanity, and we're taking the humanity out of it completely. What this requires is being somewhere between the semi-famous or famous Arthur Jones and his intensity-driven logic, and this just robotic um, ideology and obsession with our spreadsheets and our one set to failure in our full body every other day, and robotic just rote uh, habits, and taking the people who just forgot that your body doesn't care about what's on your TikTok. Your body doesn't care about that. Your body doesn't know what it's doing. It just knows that it's doing work. It responds to mechanical tension, your recovery, the intensity that you put into it. That's the response. Science can tell you how much stimulus will work, usually, in general. But experience tells you when that stops working. Experience will tell you when you have taken something to 1 rep in reserve, 2 reps in reserve, 0 reps in reserve, or even to true failure. And that's not something that science can actually encapsulate. And the art of understanding the science is knowing your own body and running that experiment on yourself. Not just the data, but your own personal performance. People like Dorian Yates built their careers on principles. They built their careers on working hard, efficiently, constantly adapting to, the feedback from his own progress. Mike Menser, in the end, yes, Mike Menser was insane. He went crazy. But he had the ideas to run the science through his own performance and his client's performance. And there is validity in that. He may not have been a researcher who was, isolating every single variable and putting these test subjects through a completely designed study, but he was a scientist because he was running experiments. Being a scientist doesn't mean that we have to have a lab coat and do things in a lab. We're all scientists at this point. We're running things through what we know. We're experimenting on ourselves. And that's really kind of the paradox of the science-based era. We have the most information we've ever had in the history of bodybuilding, powerlifting, whatever you're into. And yet, it seems like we're more removed from our own intuition than a lot of these old school bodybuilders were, who had no research. We can have the book smarts without actually having the experiential smarts. And that's not a good place to be either. We don't want to be on one extreme or the other of just understand or just having the science or just having the intuition. We need to have that middle ground where application meets the awareness. And that middle ground is being lost more and more each day. Even the best researchers know about this. All right, they emphasize that volume, intensity, and frequency are just the tools. It's not that there's, the commandments of lifting. We don't have, you have to do this many sets per body group per week, or run this specific split. No. All right. The best split, the best program is the one that you can continue to do, the one that you can continually have progressive overload with, and one that you can most importantly recover from. The evidence gives us the structure, and we as the lifters are giving it the context. Reintegration means that we're recognizing that if the science and self-experimentation are opposite of each other, then maybe we're doing something wrong. They shouldn't be opposites. They should reflect each other. The science should be showing what we're seeing with ourselves. Our self-experimentation should be backing up the science. They shouldn't be polar opposites. We start with an observation, just like in any scientific method. We start with an observation. We test a hypothesis that we've had, and we continue to evolve that through testing, rehypothesizing, testing, rehypothesizing. The only difference is one's in a lab and one is in a gym. Other than that, there is no difference. Now, for me personally, for me at Amplified Ascension, this isn't just a philosophy. This isn't some high thinking that's going to get you nowhere. This is our practice. This is what we do. If something isn't working, we run a test. We run an experiment. Not 4 weeks, not 8 weeks, not 10 weeks. But you run a long-term experiment to see, okay, what significant changes can I see? Can I be objective in that? Are there changes that other people who don't see me very often are noticing because of this? That is the self-experimentation. That is the practice of what we need to do. Training with intensity, transform with purpose is technically our slogan, but it's more than that, right? It's all about reclaiming ownership of your training. What you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. If you're training minimally, you're going to get minimal results out of it. If you're overtraining, you're going to get minimal results out of it. If you are trying to perfect your practice, if you are self-experimenting, if you are following science, understanding that there is context and limitations to it, you will get the most out of what you put in. Now, that is to say that the science is guiding what you do. It's not going to save you from a lack of recovery, a lack of nutrition. It's a guide. It's like a video game tutorial. Can you still screw those up? Kind of, yeah. It's hard if you're following what it says to do, or it's like listening to your teacher in class. Can you still mess up and get things wrong? Yeah. But if you're following along and you're doing what you're being told to do, it should reflect that if it's correct. And that's really the whole point of this, is it's the human element that we're forgetting. We can quote all the studies we want, but the human element is what bridges the data to the discipline that we have in there.